Let's speak to Paul Embery now, who's a writer and trade unionist, pro-Brexit campaigner as well. One of those lovely unicorns, a traditional leftist who loved the idea of UK sovereignty. He's also the author of Despised: Why the Modern Left Loathes the Working Class. Good question. Why does it? Here he is now. Good morning to you, Paul. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Alex. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well. Let's first of all talk about Farage tacking to the left. Some say it's sort of in response to scupper the Labour Party, pull the rug from under Starmer's feet. Nigel had a whiff of blood. He saw that the Labour Party were in turmoil over whether or not to scrap the two-child benefits cap and sort of beat him to the punch and said we would do that, although he did highlight it would be for native Brits, not migrants who come in to benefit from our welfare system, and says it's all about pronatalism. Meanwhile, Kemi Badenoch says absolutely not. Hard-working people paying taxes should not be supporting other people to have children. Who do you think is right on this?
I have to say, I think Nigel Farage is right, and there are many things, certainly economically, that I don't agree with Nigel Farage on, and I suspect that instinctively this is not something that he would wish to do particularly, but it is clearly a political calculation. I mean, first of all, I think on the morality of the cap, I think it's wrong. I think it should be lifted. The truth is that we're not having enough kids in this country. And if we can incentivize people to have more, then frankly every little helps. But I think what Nigel Farage has done is to realise what Kemi Badenoch has not realised, which is that people in the red wall and in working class communities who may be peeling away from the Labour Party, and many of them are in significant number, by the same token are not particularly attracted by, if you like, a rehashed Thatcherism, and not particularly enthused by what you might call a Singapore-on-Thames model for the British economy, which is get the state out of everyone's lives, roll back the frontiers of the state, hand over everything to the market, privatise everything, low tax, low regulation, and so on. There are some people, undoubtedly, certainly old-style Conservatives, who that agenda would appeal to, but I don't think people particularly in the red wall. And I think Farage has realised that, and I think that he realises, or is beginning to realise, that if he's going to lock in the support from the red wall, then what he needs to do is to marry, if you like, the traditional social and cultural, the small c conservative agenda on social and cultural issues with a fairer, more interventionist policy economically. If he can marry those two things, that's the sweet spot in British politics, then I think Labour could be in big, big trouble.
Now, Labour obviously, I think, know that they're in big, big trouble because they had this rather strange decision to hold a press conference seemingly all about Nigel Farage, which to me, as someone who has been a political consultant and advised world leaders on how to run election campaigns, think is totally anathema when it comes to knowing the best tactics to scupper your opponent. What you don't do is stand behind a lectern and talk about them for half an hour. And looking at the questions, it didn't really work out according to plan. Let's have a look at a montage of the sort of skewering that Starmer got from the press pack yesterday.
Do you think one of the problems is that Nigel Farage can approximate talking like a human being, where you just resort to talking points and dodging questions?
The speed of the decline in your popularity is historically unprecedented. Isn't this speech today an admission that you have failed and Nigel Farage understands voters better than you?
Nigel Farage has 5 MPs, you've got 403. Are you panicking because Reform is so far ahead in the polls, it seems? Is he living rent-free in your brain? You went to a state school, your dad worked in a factory, your mum worked in the NHS, so why has a public school-educated former city trader got more in common with the red wall than you have?
Reform UK say you're running scared of them, that you're sounding increasingly like them with some of the policies and announcements you've made recently. This is a speech that was very defensive, wasn't it? Are you not worried people will ask why you're holding a press conference about Nigel Farage 4 years out from a general election instead of focusing on your plans for the country?
You went into the election promising to freeze national insurance and keep the two-child benefit cap. You've since raised national insurance on businesses and now you're considering axing the cap. Isn't attacking Nigel Farage's economic credibility a bit rich?
I mean, it didn't exactly work out that well for him, did it, Paul?
I agree with you. I think tactically, I think that was a silly move. Essentially, he's given a huge amount of oxygen and publicity to a party which is clearly a threat, and I'm pretty sure the Labour Party knows that privately. But actually standing in front of the national media and admitting that it's a threat, arguably the biggest threat, was probably not the wisest thing to do, certainly this far out from the election when things could potentially change. But that said, I think reform probably are here to stay. I think that this is not a flash in the pan. This is not a kind of SDP situation in the early 1980s where they emerged in a blaze of glory and their star fizzled out just a few years later. I think we probably are seeing a genuine realignment in British politics. I think some of the old tribal loyalties really are breaking down. And when you look at, reform, they came. I mean, they've only got, what is it, five, 6 MPs, whatever it is at the moment, 5 MPs at the moment, but they came second in 98 seats in the general election last year, 89 of which were won by Labour, and 60 of which were in the north of England. So, as I said, they have clearly parked their tanks on Labour's lawn. And privately, Labour, I think, is wise to recognise the threat. But publicly, I think this was a stupid thing to do. But the truth is that all of the talk in the world, all of the talk from Starmer standing in front of the media saying how reform are not the answer, that I don't think is going to shift anything in terms of the opinion polls. The only thing that Labour can do to negate the reform threat is to deliver on its manifesto promises. Right. And it's not really doing that at the moment. Growth in the economy, getting immigration numbers down, getting waiting lists down, until there's significant progress on those 3 things, then all the scaremongering about reform in the world isn't going to make a difference.
Well, exactly. And what's interesting is we know that this is also part of a populist revolution that has been sweeping the West. The anti-globalist revolution, where ordinary people are going, OK, we've had enough of being dictated to by supranational entities who tell us that challenging mass migration makes us racist, that has seen us sign up to international net zero treaties that it's impoverishing us, that has seen us sort of be forced to reject the glue, the societal glue that holds us together, rooted in cultural Judeo-Christian values. And we've had enough. And what we have seen in other instances in other countries is where the legacy parties have not been able to deal with or tackle the sort of issues you're talking about. Populist parties have won, and won bigly, to quote Donald Trump. And there's an interesting article by Alistair Heath in The Telegraph yesterday, which was talking about this and saying, OK, so look at all the things that they have thrown at various populist leaders around the world. The lawfare, the accusations of fraud, the accusing them of being far-right or extremist and therefore dangerous, corralling big organisations such as the UN or the ECHR or the ECB or whoever it may be to all come out and scream, oh, it's going to be terrible, the sky is going to fall down, like they all did during Brexit, and asking, they are going to want to do this to Nigel. They're not going to be able to beat him in politics proper because they're not going to be able to deliver on the sort of concerns that voters have. And so they are going to have to decry everything he does as utterly horrific, terrifying and doom-laden, which is why I think Nigel Farage has come out early accusing Sir Keir Starmer of Project Fear 2.0. Do you think that the voters are going to sort of be rather Teflon to some of these negative attacks on Farage? Do you think it is a case of sort of Michael Gove during the Brexit campaign saying we've had enough of experts? Because in many respects, Brexit wasn't the apocalypse that everyone said it was going to be. This stuff sort of doesn't really work anymore, does it?
No, and I think Brexit was the biggest example of that, that actually people who feel that the economy isn't particularly working for them and that the status quo isn't working for them don't really have much to lose. So when the powers that be, big business, the major political parties, if you like, the liberal kind of technocratic elite come along and say to them, you really shouldn't vote for this guy or this party or this thing in that referendum because it's going to disrupt the country, then I think many of them were probably more inclined to say, well, that's exactly what I want to do because, you know what, it's not working for me the way that you guys are running it at the moment. I think on your point I think there will clearly be a lot of resistance to Farage. We've seen, the guy in Romania whose election was annulled a couple of months ago. We've seen the thing going on with Le Pen in France. Not necessarily people that I would have voted for, but if we truly believe in democracy, as we claim to do, we've got to accept that sometimes it throws up people who we don't necessarily ourselves support. And we saw with the attempt to overturn Brexit, what people in this country, what the state, if you like, and what the establishment is capable of. But I think on the broader point about the populist movements across Europe, it's pretty clear that globalization isn't working for millions of people. They were told it was going to enrich them financially and culturally and in all sorts of ways, but actually what it's led to across much of the West, particularly in working class communities, is massive deindustrialization, rapid demographic change. It's violated people's sense of community and belonging. It's upturned social cohesion, I think, in a significant way. And until the leaders of that, if you like, that liberal technocratic class grasp that and actually work with populist movements and people who are inclined to support populist movements to try to remedy some of those problems, then I think those movements are just going to get stronger.
Well, they've painted themselves into a corner, haven't they? They vilified Nigel Farage for years for being some sort of demonic xenophobe, and the public have gone, well, we think he had a point all along, so I just don't think it's going to work. Now, talking about the sort of liberal leftist elites that you were describing there, I can't think of anybody who fits that bill better right now than Lord Hermer, who is our Attorney General, the first Attorney General to have never been in politics before in 100 years. He's turned around and compared the Tories and Reform UK to the Nazi Party for questioning the jurisdiction of the ECHR, who, as we all know, have presided over some very questionable and controversial decisions. This idea, actually, that if we left the European courts of human rights, we'd start sticking kids up chimneys and reintroducing chop square outside the Tower of London. And this guy, when you look at his back catalogue of work, he's the one who, pushed for the Chagos Islands to be given to Mauritius. He's the one who's been advising Caribbean governments on how to call for slavery reparations. He's defended Gerry Adams. He called Just Stop Oil inspiring. He said that all education secretaries in this country should learn about the evils of British colonialism. He hates British exceptionalism, unless, of course, it seems that Britain is exceptionally evil or bad or malign. He's defended Al-Qaeda terrorists. He wants Shamima Begum to come home. He oversaw the prosecution of rioters and helped put people in prison for social media posts. And he has the audacity to turn around and say that people questioning the jurisdiction of the ECHR, as 9 EU countries are doing right now, who are very angry at the same loss of sovereignty and decision-making, which they see as an act of national self-harm, he has the audacity to turn around and call us the dangerous ones.
Well, I just think I don't know a huge amount about this guy, and some of the things you listed, one or two of them, I would perhaps agree with him on. But on the point about the claim that this represents Nazism and fascism and a return to the 30s and so on, I just find that sort of stuff so tedious. It seems to be now the go-to accusation from members of the liberal establishment. Whenever somebody proposes something that doesn't fit with their own worldview, then they claim that it's consistent with Nazi thought and fascist ideology and that kind of thing. And it just debases, frankly, the whole reality of what Nazism and fascism were. And I think the danger of it as well is, there are probably a small minority of people in this country still who do have sympathy with that kind of ideology, with Nazism and fascism. But what it allows them to do, when essentially you use the word so liberally and you dismiss, the significant chunk of the population as believing in that ideology, it allows the real Nazis and fascists to kind of slink into the mainstream, if you like, so they can say, well, I'm not really a Nazi and fascist because, look, they call Mrs. Jones, who lives at 23 Acacia Avenue, a Nazi and a fascist. So they say it about everybody. So it's a real dangerous thing to do as well. There is a legitimate case, not necessarily one that I agree with, but there is a legitimate case for leaving the ECHR. And the idea that people who articulate that case, because, for example, they want to reassert control over borders, are are Nazis and fascists that I think just devalues the entire argument and is a poor reflection on those who peddle that sort
Yeah,
of...
do you know, if I was in charge, I'd start forbidding the term of Nazi and fascist unless someone was an actual Nazi and fascist, because like you, I agree, it dumbs down not only the most horrific atrocities in history, which I think is offensive to all those people who lost their lives fighting the twin spectres of evil that stalked across Europe at the start of the last century, but it also renders any accusation in the modern age just absolutely worthless, and it's dangerous. It's dangerous because if the left keep pointing at the right wing as being Nazis and fascists, it sort of suggests that they're so dangerous they need to be stopped by any means. And I think actually provokes violence against political opponents. Paul Embery, thank you ever so much.